Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Huge thanks to our show sponsor today, EvolveFish.com. They have a brand new website they just launched. Easier to navigate, it's fun to browse, and they have so much stuff. Everything from t-shirts to auto emblems to buttons and coffee mugs and other drinkware, stickers, jewelry, keychains, and so much more. Evolve Fish specializes in products that promote science over superstition, humanism over religion, and awesome and fun and conversation-starting stuff. They just added the earrings that have the atheist atom symbol on them. You can freshen your breath with sin omens, complete with a little devil right there on the packaging. Get a Thinking Atheist coffee mug or mugs from the Secular Student Alliance or the Atheist Experience or Darwin Day and so many others. They have a Cthulhu canvas tote bag, the Science Rocketfish car emblem, the t-shirt that says, "I'm going to hell in every religion." So much good stuff. Check out the new website and support this show by supporting an organization that has for so long helped to promote woo-free, pro-science, and pro-humanist messages on everything they make. Log on today and check it out. EvolveFish.com. That's EvolveFish.com. Make a note to join us for the show next Tuesday. I have an interesting conversation coming up with a YouTube activist. His name is Steve Baughman, but he's known as the Friendly Banjo Atheist. And he has been following a Christian evangelist, a very popular one named Ravi Zacharias. Now, Ravi Zacharias has been positioning himself as someone who had studied at Cambridge and Oxford and who was educated in quantum physics. Well, Steve Baughman went and did some homework to find out if any of those things were actually true. And you will be amazed at what he found. So I'm going to talk to him, and we're going to talk about Ravi Zacharias next week on a broadcast that I'm calling Degrees of Doubt, the Claims and Credentials of Ravi Zacharias. So you want to join us for that next week. Gearing up for a busy month of May. Lots to do, including a tour of the South. I'm going to go down and bring kind of a flashy and hopefully therapeutic presentation and a chance to hang out with my fellow heathens. Going to be in New Orleans on May the 20th. Going to be in Jackson, Mississippi, May the 21st. Memphis, Tennessee on May the 23rd. May 24th, going to be in Springfield. And then Fort Smith, Arkansas has confirmed for May the 25th. So I'm just going to hop in the car, going to cruise from city to city to city, and I would love a chance to meet you. Come on out. Be a part of those. You can see all the events at thethinkingatheist.com/events. Looking ahead to other dates in 2017, just real fast. June 2nd weekend, I'll be in Toronto for Imagine No Religion 7. Mid-June, I'm going to be doing 2 stops in Arizona. Going to be in Flagstaff and Phoenix on the 17th and 18th of June. July the 8th, Denver. July 28th, I'll be in St. Louis for Gateway to Reason. August 13th, I'll be in Fullerton, California. The weekend of August 19th is the big American Atheist Solar Eclipse Convention. The sun disappears and the atheists converge. That's coming up the weekend of August 19th. I'll be at the Kentucky Free Thought Convention in Louisville, Kentucky, September 2nd. I'll be in Milwaukee, September 30th, and Orlando, Florida, October the 20th. Lots going on. All the details at thethinkingatheist.com/events. Tonight's broadcast is a conversation with and kind of a profile of a fellow atheist activist who's been out there for several years. I've had him on the show a couple of times as part of the God Awful Movies crew, but he has been host of the Scathing Atheist podcast for a number of years, and it's a popular, award-winning show. No Lugeons is the host. He's a guy that I really respect and admire out there, and I just thought it'd be great to hang out and just talk, just find out what he's about and what he's been doing and what's happening in his world, get his perspective on just the conversations that are happening in the atheist movement and beyond. And he joins me on the broadcast today, No Lugeons, host of the Scathing Atheist. Great to have you, man.
Pleasure to be here, man.
So tell me about your show. Of course, we had kind of a friendly rivalry going on. This was a couple of years ago, right? It was like you were nominated for a podcast award, and I think I remember lending my voice to something. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, it was a really fun one. We had a couple of years ago, I believe 5 of the 10 nominees for the best religious podcast were atheist shows.
I love it.
Yeah, it really tells you kind of what the internet has done for the atheist movement, I think. So we started a little bit of a little trash talk on our show with some of the other atheist shows, invited a bunch of people on to, fire people up to vote for their favorite atheist show. We were going to be happy as long as an atheist show ended up winning the award. Of course, we ended up winning the award. We were most happy with that atheist show winning, but
congratulations on that. I mean, that's a big deal. And it's nice to see the atheist podcast recognized. I look at the religion category in many of the podcasts. I don't have a lot of time to check out a lot of other stuff that's out there. Do you find that's the case as an activist? People are like, hey, watch this 2-hour video or listen to this 3-hour podcast. And you're like, man, I'd like to have myself cloned, but it's just, physically impossible. Do you ever get there in your life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, for a lot of reasons, it's because for atheists, there's nowhere else for us to go. Like this sort of podcasting is the top rung of the atheist ladder in a sense. I feel like if a Christian was really good at what we do, they'd end up on radio. They'd end up with their own TV show. We got to stick with what we've got, I guess.
There's a lot of Christian broadcasting out there. Most of it is, in my opinion, almost unlistenable. There are some exceptions. I think there are some thoughtful believers out there who are trying to navigate through, and they're genuinely, there's a myriad of reasons for belief, but at least they seem like they're relatively good people who are genuinely trying. And then there were others, like Dennis Prager and all these people who produce religious content, and you just want to smash your head up against the wall. It's just almost unwatchable, unlistenable.
I always want to smash a head against the wall. Yeah, it's not.
So you started broadcasting when and why and how?
It was almost 5 years ago now, I guess, when we got started. I say almost 5 years ago. It's like 4 years and 3 months. I'm trying to make us sound like old pros at it.
I like it. 5 years, sure.
But at that time, the landscape of atheist podcasts was a lot narrower than it is now. And most of the shows that were out there were shows that were largely meant as outreach to religious people, that were meant as like, hey, guys, look, we're out here. We're not eating babies. We're not horribly immoral. We're just normal people. And I think those shows are great. And I think those shows are really important. But I wanted a show that was really just for atheists. Now, this, like I said, 4.5 years ago, the landscape of religious or atheist podcasts was quite a bit different. There are quite a few of those now, but at the time there wasn't a lot. So we felt like we could help fill that niche a bit.
I found the temperature of my own shows, my own content has changed over the years. Do you feel differently? Like, is the temperature of how you produce what you do different now than it was half a decade ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, for me, at the very least, I have softened quite a bit over the last 4.5 years. When I listen to the stuff that I recorded when I first started, I think, man, that was pretty harsh, dude. Did you really need to go that far?
Where'd that come from, though? No, I mean, were you post-religion? Were you coming out and pissed off? What drove that?
Well, I was never really religious, but I lived in very religious parts of the world. Spent most of my life living in Georgia and in southern Georgia, no less. So,
wow.
The frustration had been welling up in me for, a good 35 years when I finally let it out. And I think that just the steam that was coming out when the podcast first aired had just had a lot more time to back up.
Yeah. And then you found yourself sort of leveling out, not minimizing your message, but the temperature of how you delivered what you delivered. I found that was the case in my own life. If you look at the early content, I'm extremely sarcastic and I have my moments. We've all got our moments. but I feel like I sort of got it out of my system, and I started to temper just a little bit after the 2.5 year mark, something like that. So
Yeah, I'd say it was about the same for us.
what's the show about? What do you do?
Well, we just basically try to take on the news items of the day, try to keep it current. We try to talk a lot of counter apologetics. The idea, sort of the inspiration for the show, like I said, was a show for and by atheists. So our primary goal is to entertain. Our primary goal is to make our audience laugh. We want to make you think. We want to make you nod along. We want to maybe introduce you to some subjects that you might not be familiar with. But, if I can make you laugh 4 or 5 times in an hour, I feel like I've done my job.
You have been part of the God Awful Movies crew. You're juggling both shows now at the same time?
Actually doing 4 podcasts at this time.
What?
We're doing,
how does this happen? I've got one and I'm overwhelmed. I'm up all night thinking about all the stuff that needs to be done with the site and the videos and in the one show. And you do 4?
Well, I have the advantage of some phenomenally good partners in the work that I do. Obviously, Eli Bosnick, Heath Enright. They've been on your show before. Those guys are super hard workers, super funny guys. So, we've got and the 4th show, one that we just launched called Citation Needed. We're doing that with Tom and Cecil from the Cognitive Dissonance podcast.
Citation Needed. Love the title.
I'm going to take total credit for it. It was Tom's idea, but I'm going to take total credit for it. But yeah, I feel like so if you think about it, me doing 4 shows with 4 other people, that's not quite as much as you doing one show on your own. We're pretty much tied.
A lot of people are born and they don't really buy into the faith, and they're surrounded by religiosity, and they don't jump into activism. They don't become no illusions. They don't end up with 4 radio shows and, going, I saw you guys out at the Reason Rally and you are an activist in so many senses of the word. There's a fire in your belly. There's a reason you do what you do. What drives that?
I guess the honest truth is I've seen a lot of the victims of it. And I think when people are victimized by religion, often they don't realize what they've been victimized by. They think that they were victimized by this one bad guy or, this one bad interpretation of the faith and everything. And I feel like, at least for me, if I peel that back one layer at a time, it's always, generally speaking, it's always good people all the way down. It's a good person that got this person into the religion. It's a good person that told this person that being gay was going to send them to hell. It's a good person who tried to put them in conversion therapy, and it's a good person that tried to convert them. All of these people are, if you strip it all away, are good moral people trying to do what they think is the right thing. And I feel like if you don't attack the root of that problem, you're not attacking that problem at all.
It's a twisting of values. Someone sincerely believes that the right thing is to condemn gay people. And I call them victims of bad ideas. I'm surrounded by people who, if you look at their lives, it's not like they want to go out and screw up the world. And perhaps in some ways that makes them more dangerous when they are that sincere that they are doing the right thing. I am absolutely suffocating in Fox News Christians here in Oklahoma. Where do you live now, Noah?
I'm in Pennsylvania now. Now, unfortunately, I'm in the Bible Belt part of Pennsylvania, which is all the non-Pittsburgh, non-Philadelphia parts. But it's definitely
so you guys have a Bible Belt there. You've got churches on the corners, and you've got, the first 3 questions they ask is, what's your name, what do you do, and where do you go to church, right?
Yeah, and like I said, not quite as bad as it was in Georgia, but it's pretty bad around here still.
Well, tell me about Georgia. I mean, I'm not lying to you. No, I got an email last week from someone who was like a closeted atheist, sort of a freshly emerged apostate in Georgia. And she's like, it's so hard being an atheist in this state. She sounded terrified. Like, what are they going to do? What are the consequences going to be? And, the cliche is, the religious South. Is it really that bad?
Well, I'll tell you where I was. It certainly was. I lived in Valdosta, Georgia. It's practically Florida border there. And every day I would take about a 1.5 mile walk to the store and back, listening to podcasts. And on that, I actually counted this one time for the purposes of a thing I was doing on the show. On the way from my house to the store, I would see, I want to say it was 16 different religious signs, religious yard signs, religious bumper stickers. I passed by a religious daycare. So you cannot walk what is that, a 13th of a mile or so before you come across more religious propaganda in that state.
There's a big billboard off of Highway 51 here in Tulsa, and it just says turn or burn, and it's got burn in flames. Burn is actually a flame. The word is in graphic form. And then they have this like 800 or 866 number that you're supposed to call underneath. And I think at one point I even took a cell phone photograph of it and put it online. And I'm like, really? I mean, this is what they want thousands of people to encounter on their way to and from work Monday through Friday. It's just pathetic.
Yeah, ours were mostly anti-abortion billboards. That's, I think, what my town was known for. If you're driving to Florida, Valdosta is the town where you saw all the anti-abortion billboards. The
cliches continue as well, and often cliches exist for a reason about the deep racism of the South. Continuing in Georgia, do you see instances of the racial divide even now?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up until I was about 13 years old. I lived in Detroit. And then my family up and moved to South Georgia. And man, I'll tell you what, that was the biggest culture shift for me, was just in Detroit, I went to a mostly black school. Virtually all my friends were black. The neighborhood I lived in was primarily black. And then to move down south and to see that, all the kids of color had their own table at the cafeteria and all the white kids had the rest, that was a real culture shock for me.
And a lot of that colored in religious language, people standing on the Bible to talk about sort of a racial superiority. It sounds like the 60s, but it continues even now.
In a lot of ways, the South is like the 60s, yeah.
But there are pockets. I see also there are free thought groups that are, emerging and blossoming. I think it's like when they did the free thought conventions here in Oklahoma, they're well attended. I mean, hundreds upon hundreds of people come out to those. And the free thought group, I think Oklahoma's, it's got like 1,200 members, and I think they've got something just under here in Tulsa. I think there are people who are desperate to breathe in Jesus Town. The free thinkers, the non-religious, those who are tired of all the crap, I think are seeking a hub, and they've become this sort of silent minority. If they are a minority, I think they're just waiting for the opportunity to go public somehow. I don't know. It might be a fantasy, but that's what it feels like.
Well, yeah, I think, when you get into those more religious communities, the atheist groups tend to be a little more diehard. They might not have quite as many people in them. But I took a trip to England at the end of last year for the QED conference. And it was so interesting meeting the people there that listen to your show, listen to my show, and say, I just do it to sort of tap into what goes on in America. It's not a big deal here the way it is there. So obviously I feel like, the atheist movement is most needed in the places with the most religion. And I'd say Oklahoma City probably qualifies.
You mentioned that you do a lot on counter-apologetics on your broadcasts, plural, but on the Scathing Atheist especially. What are some of the biggies? I mean, what are the ones that make your eyes twitch? What are the apologists and the apologetics arguments that you find yourself just, again, wanting to smash somebody's head against the wall? Any favorites?
Well, I'll tell you what, the logically framed ones are fine for me because I can talk logic, right? If you come and you tell me, that die for a lie argument, or you give me Pascal's wager, I can logic my way around that. The one that really frustrates me lately is what I call God the ingredientless sandwich. This apologetic you get from these kind of the more wishy-washy liberal Christians where, oh, yeah, but God isn't that. Oh, but God isn't that either. Oh, God's not that either. And by the time you get done, God is nothing at all. So you have nothing to argue with. It's like trying to punch a trampoline into unconsciousness.
The ever-moving goalpost,
yeah,
right? That's not my God. That's not my God. That's not the God that I know personally that I can't verify to you, but I know personally. It's a hugely convenient excuse.
Yeah, well, my kind of go-to line there is I can refute your God to precisely the degree that you can define him.
Do you ever work with the presups, the presuppositional folks? God must exist for all this other stuff to exist.
Yeah, not if I can help it. That is a convoluted apologetic right there. I don't even know if I can get my head around what they're trying to say well enough to argue back.
I think that's part of the strategy. Mm-hmm. If you presuppose God, then everything else sort of becomes a setup.
Right. Yeah. All you can really do in terms of formal logic is to continuously say, I do not accept your first premise.
Any other special? I know you guys have a special place in your heart for Ray Comfort and whatnot, but anybody else?
Oh yeah, Ken Ham obviously gets an awful lot of airtime. My co-host Heath Enright dubbed him Amish Wolverine one time, and that stuck.
Somebody make a movie poster, please, and post it. Ugh.
I think
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, by all means. I think we're milking what we can out of Pat Robertson while he's still around. Bless his little heart.
Yeah, he's getting. Who would have thunk he could have gotten weirder? But the last 5 years, it's just bizarre. And of course, he's latched his wagon onto the Trump train to such an extent where he's talking about condemnation if you speak out against God's appointee. It's bizarre.
Well, he said the other day that he had gotten together with Kevin Sorbo and the two of them were going to make movies together. So very excited about that.
Kevin Sorbo, is he a legitimate believer, or did he find a niche as sort of a has-been television actor? A guy who was big decades ago, needed a place to land, and found Christian media. That's the question I find myself asking.
Well, we do the God Awful Movies podcast, and so I could hand you, a list of 50 names of exactly those Kevin Sorbos of the world. These actors that you look at, you're like, oh, I remember you. You're in Christian movies now, huh? And
yeah.
You see that a lot in I guess in any industry, or especially any celebrity industry. When the actor finds himself in prison and all of a sudden nobody wants to cast him anymore, or when the musician finds themselves in trouble, they turn to Jesus and they find Jesus and everybody forgives them. So I guess this is like a more extreme version of that, more than likely. I mean, obviously we can't speak to what Kevin Sorbo truly believes in his heart of hearts, but it's an awful convenient conversion, isn't it?
And God's not dead. He is this caricature of the atheist professor, who is sort of passing down this edict to his students. He's a God hater. He's all of the things that most of the people that you and I know who are atheist activists are not. And it speaks to a language barrier between, or just out and out dishonesty between the apologists, the religious producers of Christian media and otherwise, and the atheist culture, atheist people. They pretend to know us, but the people that they pitch up here on, put them up on the platform, the character that Kevin Sorbo plays in the film is nothing like the atheist that you and I know.
You're right. Yeah, I think a lot of this comes from, because if you look at that character, it strikes you as sort of like, a religious person's reading of Hitch, as though like that's what Christopher Hitchens just walked around like every day, and every derogatory or divisive thing that he ever said in writing, that's just the way he addresses Christians in the regular world. Or, you've got some of those like real angry atheists on social media that might go off on the Kevin Sorbo character in God's Not Dead, and a lot of the atheist characters you encounter in Christian movies tend to be sort of this personification of the really, really angry atheist who's at his last straw on Facebook. And I think for a lot of Christians, that might be the only familiarity they really have with an atheist, being an atheist. Obviously, they interact with atheists every day, but, they're just not discussing religion at the time.
I know I was listening. I did find time actually to listen to a God Awful Movies review of The Shack, which was based on this hugely popular book, and it stars Sam Worthington. And I was laughing out loud at your podcast. And, you were talking about how this is, I think, how you'd phrased it. His daughter was murder raped, and yet somehow this was all part of God's divine plan. There's an angel comes to appear before him in the form of a black woman. And give me your synopsis, just real fast. Let's talk about The Shack. What do you think?
Well, I think this is a great example of that sort of God the ingredientless sandwich theology. What cracks me up the most about The Shack is that the hardcore Christians are also getting upset because it has this message of universal redemption behind it. But yeah, I think this is a great example of the fact that when it comes to Christian movies, even if you get yourself good actors and you get yourself a director that knows what they're doing and a real production company, you still come up with crap. I mean, Sam Worthington. Well, Sam Worthington is not a very good actor, actually, as it turns out. But he's a legit. He's a guy you've heard of anyway. But it's all about a guy who gets his daughter gets kidnapped and raped and murdered by a crazy guy, and he sure is bummed about that until God sends him a letter asking him to meet him in the woods in the form of Hispanic Jesus and an Asian Holy Spirit lady, and for whatever reason, every Christian movie has a magical black woman in it somewhere. In this movie, it was the one playing God, and they all just hang out and walk on water together until he's over that murder rape and back on track.
It's interesting that they always have the black woman play she's the oracle in the Matrix films. Mm-hmm. You know, she's wiser than her years, and there's something going on behind the eyes, some ethereal quality, a spiritual quality, sort of a wise old woman kind of deal. It's so prevalent as to become cliche.
Yeah, and it's not just in Christian movies, I guess. You get the the magical black lady in quite a few films, like the Matrix obviously being a great example.
Talking here with no illusions. I don't want to spend too much time just talking about the god-awful movies, but I just am so interested and fascinated by Christian media. And I know these are hugely profitable. They're most of them made for about $1.50, and they make millions in return. It's great business. If you and I decided to fake our return to the faith, we could probably make some coin in there. No. But what are some of the most batshit bizarre? I mean, give me some Christian films that as you watched it, you thought, I'm in a parallel universe. They cannot be playing this straight. Anything come to mind? I mean, just rattle off one or two. I'm just curious.
Well, generally speaking, when you ask me that question, my answer is going to be the one I watched most recently. But we came across a gem for ReasonCon this year. It's called Burning Hell. By a fellow named Estes Perkel. Now, you may remember Estes Perkel.
We did a review of him together. What was the name of the film?
If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do?
Horses Do. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it turns out he has an even more batshit crazy movie out there. And it's just a sermon. It's like an hour-long sermon, but they've reenacted parts of the Bible, and they've added little stories to emphasize some of the points he's making. At one point, was it Herod who gets eaten by the worms in the Bible?
Jesus, I don't know. I'll have to go look it up.
Yeah, well, they have this scene where they're reenacting Herod being killed by God for his arrogance. And they say, and Estes Perkel is preaching in the background as they reenact this, and he says, and he was eaten by worms right there. And they show you this guy with worms crawling all over his face, and then they show the audience freaking out, and they keep going back to it, and he's like slightly more decomposed with slightly more worms on him. They linger on this for a good 4 minutes.
Acts 12:23. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. Learn something new every day. Well, Estes Perkel has a thing for kind of murder porn anyway, right? I mean, if Footman Tire, he was, showing children getting their heads chopped off, and it was all people having spears driven through their throats. I mean, it was just, and he seemed to revel in the violence of it while he was talking about how contemptible and horrible it was. And it seems a convenient cover for somebody who may actually sort of get off on watching this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. His whole thing is, he's got the scared straight approach. He'll come up several times in his movie saying, "Did that shock you? Imagine what it'll be like when it's like that for eternity, and you have nowhere else to go. You can't turn off hell."
When we come back, No Illusions is off on a rant. And he's written these rants down. We're going to talk more about that. We're going to talk more about the Scathing Atheist, the atheist movement in general, and just kind of whatever comes up. It's a conversation with a fellow activist that continues right after this. Don't forget, my supporters on Patreon get a commercial-free version of the broadcast and a bonus broadcast every single month. Thank you so much for your support. You can go to patreon.com/Seth Andrews. I'll throw you some love here, Noah. You got a Patreon thing going? How do you guys support what you do?
Yeah, we're primarily funded through Patreon. It'd be patreon.com/Scathing Atheist, or patreon.com/godawful, or patreon.com/skeptocrat, or patreon.com/citationpod.
So many podcasts. Well, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to do what I do full time. It's funny, when the company that I worked for finally closed its doors a few years ago, I was excited/nervous. Are you a full-time activist? Do you do this full time now?
Yeah, sure do.
Were you scared shitless and excited at the same time you made that transition?
Well, I was just scared shitless. I didn't make it as intentionally as you did. I made it for the same reason. I think, the company I was working for was sort of crumbling around me. And very suddenly I found myself, and my wife worked for the same company. We were both suddenly unemployed and homeless because we lived in company housing at the time. And at that moment, the only thing I had that was making any money was the podcast. So I sort of I had a little severance pay. I said, let me take 3 months or so and figure out what I'm doing, get myself back on track. And by the end of that 3 months, it really looked like the podcast was going to be able to turn into a full-time income. And I think, I probably had the same feeling that you did for quite a while before you went full-time with it, which is, boy, if I could devote all my time to this, I could produce a much better show. I could produce the kind of show that I think would support me full-time.
Some people get weird about, for lack of a better way of saying it, the business of being an activist. Like, if you do this for a living, somehow you're cheating. So if you make an income, somehow you've sold out, and therefore the things you say cannot be trusted as much. There's money changing hands kind of a thing. And I found that argument extremely frustrating and occasionally maddening, because we've got a billions of dollars religious machine, a steamroller going out there, funded all across the planet, which has thousands of years of momentum behind it. And apparently they want atheist or free thought or secular or science-based content producers to just sort of keep this content in the back pocket working on a shoestring and somehow be an effective counter to the religious machine. And I find those arguments just maddening.
Well, that's a really great point, the way that you just phrased it. But yeah, I mean, look, if it wasn't for the fact that Seth Andrews can make a living doing what he's doing, you'd have to be doing something else, right? So either we have to put in, have a situation where people like yourself and myself can actually make a living at what we're doing, or you and I have to move on. We have to move on to some universe that can pay us for that time. As much as I love doing what I'm doing, I spend about 65 hours a week doing it. There's absolutely no way that you could do that without the support of the community.
Let's talk about the atheist movement itself. I don't want us all to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, Noah. I don't need us all to agree. I don't want us all to agree. I don't think it's healthy for us to just constantly be in blind agreement about everything. But we seem to be right now in the year 2017, a movement where there's a lot of clawing at each other. One activist is baiting somebody else on Twitter, and then they respond, and then people choose sides, and before you know it, there's a blog post, and then there's a video and a response video, and so-and-so said this, and so-and-so's a liar, and so-and-so's a dumbass, and so-and-so's a fake. And I look at the movement that I love, and I am often just so disheartened by the propensity we have, the eagerness we have, many of us have, to divide instead of unite. Do you watch any of this, and what are your thoughts as an activist?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it in abject horror the same way you do, Seth. And I try as much as I can to avoid that. The way I figure it, yes, there are atheists out there, people in the atheist movement that I disagree with, say things that I don't like. But I feel like, the worst thing they say is better than the best thing Pat Robertson says. So I'll keep focused on him. But I think, some of it, too, is this is a movement that has expanded wildly in the last 7, 8, 10 years. When you first started podcasting, the atheist community was a much more tighter knit, much smaller group of human beings. But it's expanded to the point now where, I think the idea that there's one umbrella that we can all stand under might be a little unrealistic. It might be a little bit wishful thinking at this point. I understand that a lot of people are maybe trying to tug the secular movement this way or that way. Obviously, whenever you see a group of motivated people like that and you have a social cause that matters to you, you want to rally that group of people around your social cause. So, I think it's just a matter of it's almost like a sign that we're doing something right, that there is this much division. Or maybe that's my Pollyannish way of looking at things. But I really do think it's just a necessary growing pain of any movement our size.
It may be in some ways a necessary revelation. I mean, every movement has its best and its worst. Atheism isn't immune to ugliness. And, you'll find people in any culture, church culture, in any cause, social cause, you'll find them in the atheist movement who are damaging people. They're not interested in the best ideas. I think some may be interested more in celebrity than they are in actually being you're going to have to own your position as the franchise player if you're going to be an activist on the front lines. And I enjoy doing what I do. I enjoy being the host of the show and the admin of the site and whatnot. But I, at the end of the day, really more than that, want to be about the ideas. I think there are some who find this is an opportunity for celebrity, or I think they simply just enjoy trolling everyone. It gets them hits, they get YouTube or whatever revenue out of it. And it's disheartening to see that sort of a darker shade. I don't spend too much time talking about it, though, because I think it becomes a cancer that feeds on itself.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And I think that there are definitely a few people that are guilty of the, taking the easy clickbaity, oh, I thought I liked this guy. And wait, what did he say now? What did he do? Yeah.
In the era of the response video, too, it's interesting that you say something that I disagree with, Noah. Instead of calling you up or sending you an email and saying, hey, Noah, you said something and I've got a few concerns about it, or I'd like to clarify, or I kind of disagree, but here's why. In good faith, I just reach out to you and I say, Noah, this grieves me. It concerns me a little bit, and I want to talk about it. Instead of doing that in the internet culture, in the YouTube response video culture, I run off to my lair, right? And I produce a video that says, no, Lugeons is the biggest dumbass on the internet, and here's why. And so immediately I've inflamed. You go on the defensive. You do a response video to me. And it just seems like this vicious cycle where nobody's talking to each other. They're so busy yelling at each other and trying to get the audience to choose sides. I don't want us to agree on everything. I think sometimes you do have to go public. Hell, I did it whenever C.J. Werleman released his just horrific book called The New Atheist Threat. I wrote a 4,500 word review of the book because I was mentioned in it. It was a public thing and I had to make a public response. But more than anything, I'd like to see human beings treat each other with empathy and compassion and at least attempt to throw water on the spark before they throw gasoline on it.
Well, and so often when you get down to the when you start stripping away all of the rhetoric and everything, the spark is so tiny. The disagreement is so little at the center of it all, So, yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are sort of intentionally inflaming that kind of stuff, because when it comes right down to it, if you look at the disagreements that we have within the atheist community, yes, there are some very substantive disagreements, but you're never going to see us go into war for 400 years over whether the cracker really turns into Jesus. And, you see, like David Silverman has a great point that he makes in Fighting God about how Christians are so quick to unite despite these very real differences that they have in their theology and in their worldviews, et cetera, whereas atheists are super quick to divide over whether or not I'm a hard agnostic or or with whatever. And I think there's a real important, there's not much that I want to pluck out of the Christian universe and bring into atheism, but that's one thing I'd love to see more of.
Do you get stuck on the labels, atheist, agnostic?
I try not to, actually. I made a pretty bold statement regarding the utility of the term agnostic on my show a while back, and
What'd you say about it?
Well, I don't agree with the atheists that describe themselves as agnostic atheists. I think that's a confusing term. It's an unnecessarily confusing term. It sort of confuses the meaning of the term agnostic. When someone says they're politically agnostic, you assume that to mean that they're neither left nor right. When someone says they're religiously agnostic, all of a sudden it's supposed to refer to the level of certainty I have about a thing or what have you. So I agree with the point that's being made when people say I'm an agnostic atheist, but I feel like there's a concession being, I'm an agnostic gravitationalist. If you come to me with evidence that shows me definitively that gravity doesn't exist, I'm going to change my mind. I'm like that about everything.
Penn Jillette once said something like, there's a term for the person who says, well, I think there might be something out there, but I really don't know. I haven't seen any evidence, but I'm open. And there's a word for that person, and it's atheist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think I made that point a little less pithy and a little less clever than Penn did. And I've been getting email about that for, I guess a year and a half of people taking issue with my take on their label. So as much as possible, I try to avoid the label commentary unless I think it really matters. And I think in that case it did.
Here it is. I just drew a big circle around it so that you'll get more hate mail.
Yeah,
well, I get it. Like, I'm an agnostic in the sense that, I don't know beyond all shadow of a doubt that there might not be something out there, but there's no evidence to support a God. I do not believe in God. So, of course, the agnosticism speaks to what I know. The atheism speaks to what I believe. What I don't like is when someone says that the agnostic is the atheist without a spine, too gutless to actually say what they're really thinking, to make the declaration outright. I don't think that's necessarily fair to do that. I don't know. Did you have a perspective?
Well, you know what? I'm gonna make an angry response video to what you just said, Seth, and I'm gonna post it. No, actually, that was the crux of the argument that I was having in the show, and I think you and I are representing opposite sides of it. So I'm sort of reliving all my my inbox nightmares. In the wake.
So you think the agnostic is just a total wuss?
No, I just think some agnostics are wusses. No, but
I buy that. Look, I buy there are some who simply won't commit. I get that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I feel like when atheists use the term agnostic when they're explaining to religious people that they're an agnostic atheist, I think it's important that we emphasize when we do that if you're thinking properly, if you're doing this whole thinking about things right, you should be agnostic about all things in that sense, right? You shouldn't be dead certain about anything. And I am as dead certain, for example, that there is no God as I am dead certain that gravity exists, or
and there is no Santa Claus and all that. Yeah, I get that.
Exactly. Now, technically speaking, if you bring me enough evidence, I will say, you know what? I was wrong on Bigfoot, but I'm not going to go into an argument with a Bigfoot guy by saying that I'm a Bigfoot agnostic.
I agree that I think the answer to the question, what's your position on the idea of God? The answer should be atheist. Because if you are agnostic, you are an atheist. If you don't know, then you don't have a God belief.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is that little spark of a disagreement that can turn into a raging fire if you don't just talk it out.
Talk to me about some of the stuff you've been writing. Tell me about the other stuff you're working on. You've got a book. Is it an ebook? Is it paperback? Is it hardcover? What is it?
Yeah, you can get it both as paperback and ebook. It's actually a compilation of essays that I wrote for the show. At the beginning of each show, I do a monologue that I call a diatribe. About 5-6 minutes railing against something in the religious universe that's caught my ire that week. And I think a great example if for people who aren't familiar with my show, I guess it's been over a year now. Anybody who listens to Thinking Atheist knows that Seth does a ton of work setting up his interviews and making sure he's knowledgeable on the subject he's talking about, finding interesting articles for, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to say it was a little over a year ago. You did an episode where it really seemed like you just turned on the microphone and let some stuff out.
People still talk about that show. Yeah.
Well, yeah, right. The show that you put, hours and hours and hours and hours of prep work into. They're like, hey, great job. But the show that you just turned on the microphone and started yelling into it, everybody's like, best thing you've ever done, right?
Well, yeah, it's true.
But I think that really speaks to a need that we have as atheists, especially if you're in Oklahoma, if you're in Georgia, if you're, surrounded by a religious family or whatever. Once in a while, you just want to scream about how stupid the argument that you're having is, but you can't because you're trying to be reasonable, because you're trying to explain things to people and you got to deal with these people on a day-to-day basis. So every week I set aside 5 or 6 minutes to try my best to yell all that stuff you wish you could yell at the religious person that you're arguing with. I've done 2 Diatribes books now. The latest one is a compilation of 50 of the Diatribes that I did. I guess this would have been the Diatribes I did in the year 2014. So a bunch of different subjects that were topical at the time, but more than anything, it's just a series of essays, fairly easy reads on the various subjects that come up for you day to day as an atheist.
What happens next? What are you working on next? What do you foresee happening in the culture next? I mean, let's try to predict the future, man. What do you think?
Well, let's see. I'm hoping for a vacation at some point. I've been at this for 5 years, Seth. That's really all I've got in my mind is I'm hoping that I can take a week off of it at some point.
Do you struggle with that? I mean, I think all creative people, it's like the person who's a musician, who's a songwriter, and one day they sit down at the piano or they pick up the guitar or whatever, and it's like a foreign language. They're up against the brick wall. Nothing's coming. No ideas. The imagination is closed down. It's a dry, rocky place. I think I said something on social media a while back that from time to time, I will sit in front of the microphone or sit in front of a video editor or try to write a script or try to put a speech together. And I find myself thinking, I used to be good at this. I thought I was good at this. And now I'm a desert. I'm a barren place. I cannot draw the water from the well. I cannot find the next idea. And then I punish myself. And I guess this is common among producers. Do you ever get there where you're like, oh my, will I ever get it back? Have I spent everything I've ever had creatively and I'm now useless to the movement? Do you ever get there?
Well, after that admission from you, Seth, I'd feel really bad. I'd feel really guilty if I said, no, I haven't.
I don't know. I might ask you what your secret is. I mean, everybody's got a way to get through it. Like, and I swear to you, this sounds bizarre. But if I go out and take like a long night drive, sometimes it just helps me to sort of clear the cobwebs out, just busting out and just the sound of the road. And sometimes that really helps me to reset. But I've gone through a period where a couple of weeks I thought, have I lost it? Am I done? Am I now useless at middle age and I'm terrified? I don't know. Do you always have an idea, something to work on? Do you ever hit the brick?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that's a lot of it's a product of doing it as long as you've been doing this, as long as we've been doing this kind of thing, is that at a certain point, it's just like, I've talked about that an awful lot.
Hey, so many times. How many times can Ken Ham put a tweet up and you're like, we've already done it, right? We've done Noah's Ark. We've done the logistics of the flood. We've done the animals. We've done intelligent design. We've done all the guilt and shame. I mean, it's often hard to address arguments that have not changed over the course of thousands of years. And it's a challenge as a content producer to keep things fresh, but it's also a conversation that if we disappear, that means the Ken Hams of the world and the Ray Comforts and the Pat Robertsons, they get the monopoly on the dialogue, and we don't want that at all.
Right, but I think you hit on exactly the problem, though, is that the people that were the ideas that we're arguing against really have not changed in 800 years. So it's not like they come out with new apologetics for us to deal with every week.
Does Ken Ham get any love in your sort of rant series as you blow off steam? Is that the kind of stuff you're railing against? Yeah,
I believe that when I wrote the diatribes that appear in the most recent book, that was right when he was getting into all his taxation fights on the way towards building the art park. And at that time, it really looked like it was not going to happen because he was going to lose a lot of his tax incentives. So I talked quite a bit about that along the way. And I think Ken Ham is such a perfect example of everything that's sort of wrong with American Christianity. He's overfunded, he's undereducated, he's on a mission to make sure that children don't know true things. So I think he is like almost the perfect atheist whipping boy.
What are some of the other things you tackle? Just, give me sort of a taste of it, and I'll give everybody the link to pursue it if they want. I'll put that in the description box.
Well, like I said, it's mostly just those sort of head scratchers that you have. You're out at the store and you look over and there's a table with some little church group that says, do you have questions about Jesus? We have answers. And you think to yourself, you know what, I'd like to go over there and tell them. Those are most of the subjects I deal with.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Diatribes, Volume 2, 50 Essays from a Scathing Atheist.
50 Essays from a Scathing Atheist. I'll include that link, and I'll probably check it out myself. How's everything else in your life? You doing all right? Things good? Family good?
Yeah, keeping busy. My wife just bought me a new Nintendo Switch, so I've been horribly addicted to the new Zelda game, which that works out great when you've got a 65-hour-a-week work schedule.
What year did you graduate high school, Noah?
Would have been 1992.
Okay, you and I are pretty close. So you remember Legend of Zelda for the classic Nintendo NES, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing Zelda's still around after all this time.
The heart of the game is the same. The graphics are way better. The gameplay is way better. But the heart of the game, it's still puzzles and enemies. It's an amazing job they've done with that franchise over the years.
Did you do Metroid or any of those things back in the day, or are we too far off?
No, you're exactly dead on in my video gaming era. Absolutely.
I get nostalgic I see Defender. Galaga, I see the classics come up. Someone had a Zaxxon emulator up the other day, and I was like, I was weaned on this game.
Right.
And of course, back then it required a console the size of a barn to play, and now they've got emulators that fit in your pocket that have like 60 classic arcade games on them. I think Nintendo's got one that's it looks like an old Nintendo NES, but it's probably the size of an ashtray, and you plug your classic controllers into it and you can have access to all these other games. And I find myself going back in time to when I was a young teenager and even in my young 20s playing all these old games. They're still fun to play even now.
Yeah, I cannot walk past if I see a like a Ms. Pac-Man machine, I've got quarters going into it even to this day.
There is a film, since you're a film guy, a documentary, you may have already seen it, called A Fistful of Quarters. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, if you get a chance in your crazy, busy, insane schedule, it's called A Fistful of Quarters, and it's about the guy who had the world record for Donkey Kong, had the highest score ever of Donkey Kong. And then there's this other guy who was pursuing the high score to break the record. And it sounds so incredibly lame when I describe it to you on the radio. It sounds like C-SPAN. It sounds like it sounds like cinematic Sominex when I describe it. But I watched it on a plane on the way to a convention. I just had it up on my tablet and I watched A Fistful of Quarters. And dude, it's like a Rocky movie. It is one of the best documentaries I have ever seen, and it's about Donkey Kong. So if you ever, since you're part of that era, dude, if you ever get the chance and you got 2 hours on a plane, A Fistful of Quarters. All right, I'll give it a full 5 stars for what it's worth. All right?
Well, right on. Right on.
All right. No Illusions, thanks so much for the work you do with Scathing Atheist, God Awful Movies. Thanks for your writing. Thanks for bringing, I think, just some really good ideas and a compelling way of delivering those ideas to the conversations out there. You're making a huge difference, and it's been great to have you on the show today, man.
Well, thanks so much for the invite, man. Love to come back anytime.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.